treat or want to be treated ourselves.
Why are the prisoners our lowest?
Look right now, if we had a total economic collapse, who do you think would be the last fed, the last cared for?
I don't know. My ultimate sympathy always goes to the physically and mentally disabled. That's where my sympathy goes. It starts there.
Well, if you look at the history of the world during downtrodden times, they suffered. They suffered during the different world wars, but there was a story out of Russia where the troops in Russia fighting World War II weren't being fed. The prisoners held in Russia, they weren't being fed. People were starving to death. The bodies were placed in a latrine. The rats were eating the bodies, and then the prisoners were eating the rats. Is that how we would want to be treated? Certainly not. And society, we're not at that stage, and God willing, we never will be. But if you experience prison and see what it's like, and I experienced it in the state of Pennsylvania, which is a fairly reasonable place to be. You go to some of the more horrific prisons down in Louisiana or down in Alabama, and you hear some of the stories, it's horrific.
But the difference between that and like somebody with a mental handicap is that there is a reasonable percentage that the person that's in prison is in there for a reason, and they might have done something to put themselves in the position. The mentally handicapped person, in many cases, the physically handicapped person, did nothing. They're completely innocent. That's why I think they're the bottom. That's where my sympathy starts.
They're innocent, absolutely, and there's no disputing that. But in some cases, the mentally ill are also unaware of anything as to how their treatment is. Somebody who has, let's say, a rough life, and they, for one reason or another, went on the wrong side of the law, and they ended up in prison, and they are guilty of what they were charged with. Now, what do you do with them? Do you just throw them in the cell for the rest of their days? You look at Denmark, you look at some of the Scandinavian countries of how they treat prisoners, and there's a level of humanity that they have that if we treated pets the way that some prisons treat prisoners, the Humane Society would be in an uproar, along with society following them.
But see, while I straddle the middle ground, you're so stunningly liberal that I'm happy to go to the other side and think that you're right. You're right, and that's a good model, but it's not an accurate model because it doesn't support. We have taken on, for better or worse, the job of being the police force for the world, and we've overreached, on many things. And I think the thing is that when we're footing the bill for so many different people, that we neglect our own. It seems to be what we always do.
Yeah, that I'd say is fairly accurate.
How many countries is Denmark supporting with troops and aid?
Well, they don't support a huge prison industrial complex. They don't support a huge military industrial complex. I mean, it's a whole thing with society.
But they've got more options than we do. When something breaks out in another country, nobody turns and says, "Canada, why aren't you there?"
Oh, it is the case. We are taking on a burden that we claim is a burden, but the lowest value to the people who represent us seem to be the human lives that put on the uniform and go over and fight these wars, as opposed to other countries that would rather avoid, rather negotiate. We celebrate the veterans as we should, but we should also celebrate the diplomats that are able to avoid the wars.
Well, yeah. I think we should celebrate the peacemakers. And I've said it before, there's no parades for the battle that didn't happen. And that's what peacemakers do. They keep us out of battles. And the best one is the one that you avoid, as in with anything. But I just think, there's a definite problem in the incarceration industry where rehabilitation isn't even factored in that strongly in this country, if at all.
There aren't enough jobs for the people outside of prison, let alone if they started to release prisoners. And I'm not exceedingly liberal because I believe in justice. But once you find somebody guilty, how you treat that person. And we also have right now in society, you have, for lack of a better term, legal inflation, where more and more things are becoming crimes, and more of those crimes are becoming serious crimes that could result in an incarceration. Even if you're simply guilty of being too poor to afford bail, you're going to spend time in jail. And that was your only crime. You may be perfectly innocent of the charge, but if you can't afford representation and you can't afford bail, you may lose your job, you may lose your family, and you may spend months, if not years, sitting behind bars.
Well, there's a ridiculous cycle where somebody, somebody who is homeless for whatever reason and has no addiction, no substance thing, no mental health issue, they're homeless. They don't want to be cold. Nobody wants to be cold. They go into a vehicle to keep warm. Okay. They did not break into the vehicle. It was unlocked. They did not take anything. Then law enforcement gets involved, and then they want to write him up for a ticket. Well, this guy doesn't have money for a cup of coffee. Ticket's not going to do anything. So you're going to write him up for a ticket, then the ticket's going to come down, and then there'll be a warrant issued for him that somebody gets paid overtime to execute, and it just makes this cycle over this very minor thing. And I'm not saying that lawlessness should be supported, but I think we need to think about, even when we're keeping somebody in prison, that we're paying $44,000 a year on up to keep them there. How can we save some money and increase the quality of our product?
Well, they just had a news story the other day, and I haven't fact-checked it to confirm it, but the story was a 91-year-old World War II veteran that got arrested for feeding the homeless. Tell me, how has society benefited from him going to jail on that charge?
Well, that's just an insane extreme that hopefully it doesn't become the norm. But yeah, there are many cases not as outlandish as that, but there's always stuff where you hear about people trying to do good and being punished for it because of. I had a federal judge on here and talked about the how old laws just hamper his ability to do things, and it's an ongoing problem, but that's part of the complication of running this, this big industry called America.
Yes, and one of the greatest, most horrific crimes I feel that you could commit in this society is to be poor. The experience I had in prison, the people there who had no resources, no family, they suffered the most. And there were some people there that I looked around at the bars and the prison environment and thought how horrific it was. And they're telling me this is the best life they've ever experienced.
And it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be so that's a step up. It shouldn't be that that's the preferred choice. And that is a problem that we need to fix. But see, I think that you've been snookered like everybody else to think that it's a matter of color at this point. I think it's become money, and I think it's become popularity is the new currency that impacts what happens to you.
Yeah. In this country, we could talk about race, and that's acceptable. Nobody talks about classism. If you have a nationwide radio program and you get addicted to amphetamines, you're looked upon differently as somebody smoking weed on the street.
And they're both addictions, and they're both problems that need to be addressed. But if you look at the things that are around today, you look at, we've created these instruments by which to create this new currency of popularity. We have all these things. The richest people in the world, some of the richest people in the world, are people that are in charge of companies that make things that we didn't even know we needed 20 years ago, that we may not need. We got along pretty well with that. Google, Rich, Amazon, just a different way for us to buy things. Great. Facebook, Apple. I remember another friend of ours, I was talking about getting an iPad. I love my iPad. And he said, so let me get this straight. I should buy this thing that I don't have, don't know what it is, don't feel that I need it, so that I can buy other things to put on it and use that. And that's what and when he broke it down like that, it's like, yeah, because I have been tricked by them. I've been suckered into the whole thing. He hasn't. And good for him. Stay out.
Well, we're looking at technology, and we forget that print, ink on paper, was a technology. We got past that point. Now we're dealing with pixels on a screen. Technology brings about change. Everybody fears change. Change is. It isn't good. It isn't bad. It is. And how you utilize the technology, it's a tool. You could do incredibly good, or you could waste a lot of time. But it's a tool, and people who fear technology fear change even more so.
Well, before we go, we've got a couple minutes before we go to after show. What when you were incarcerated, the cost, was it ever explained to you why there was that extra cost on? I remember putting money in your account so you could call. And it was like old time, long distance rates, $1 a minute and things like that. It was outrageous. The postage was outrageous. You had to use their envelope and their stamp. U.S. government puts a stamp out. It's got a designated price. There's not markup on it hardly anywhere. There was tremendous markup on it there.
Well, there was nothing hidden in prison. Everybody that was in prison realized this was simply turning prisoners into a profit motive. Every single facet of prison life, you were a number on a spreadsheet. You were a cash cow. They turned you into a profit source.
And it's a shame because it's just, I think sometimes I think as much as I hate the whole money aspect of it, I think sometimes looking at the money could be the solution to things and saying, this is costing this much. How can we reduce this cost? And sometimes reducing the cost, you can actually help the people in the process because we're sustaining a bad system.
People don't want to improve. They don't want to lower the cost because right now, most all manufacturing jobs have been sent overseas. The only thing that are left are prison guards, people supplying to the prisons. You have a huge military industry. What is this country making that's sustainable? We could easily solve all of societal woes if we had the determination to do so. Right now, the people who are behind the scenes pulling the strings are making the money off the status quo. And as long as that's the case, it will never change. And they're playing a game of chicken with society to see how far can society be pushed before everybody has some family member or friend that's sitting in jail, and to the point where they give up on elections and pick up the pitchforks, and then all bets are off.
Yeah, I think it's more complicated than that. These problems have gone on for years. I mean, I remember growing up, people saying we can put a man on the moon, but we can't cure the cold, and we
don't want to cure anything. People don't make money curing diseases. They make money offering medications that keep you and the disease at bay, but there is no financial incentive to cure anything.
Why do we cure polio?
That was long ago. That was a one-shot deal that I doubt will ever be repeated. They won't cure diabetes. They won't cure Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. If they do, I hope to be proven wrong. I would love to be proven wrong. It makes me cynical. So be it.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming, and we'll have much more conversation in the after show, and we'll go more in depth on some things. Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.